political scandals, shifting alliances, brotherly betrayal, astrological abominations, and lethal math nerds. It's all here, and it's all even better than you remember. Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan, and welcome to my review for the PlayStation 5 version of Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles, which includes both the original 1997 tactical JRPG by Squaresoft and Square Enix's enhanced version of the game that now features full voice acting, 3 difficulty modes, higher resolution graphics, reworked game balance, a revamped user interface, and even animated character portraits. So today I'm reviewing the enhanced version of the game because I wanted to check out the new quality of life features and of course to see if Final Fantasy Tactics is as good as I remember. And it turns out that in many ways Tactics is even better than I remember, with just a couple of tiny little asterisks. So let me make the case for why, even though it's a busy season for video games, you've got to make time for this special star in a constellation of great 90s RPGs. And I'm going to tackle this by breaking down all the essentials I think you guys want to know about: the story, the job system, the Zodiac system, tactical combat, the visuals and sound, and finally, dedication, or how much grinding you may need to do in order to progress. And I want to start with a hugely ambitious story because it's one of Tactics' most celebrated features. So as you can guess, the Ivalice Chronicles takes place in the Kingdom of Ivalice. According to the game's narrator, a scholar attempting to piece together the real history of events that happened long ago, Ivalice has been through a lot. It begins with a 50-year-long war, which was started by Ivalice and then lost by Ivalice. The war not only ruins the countryside, but it bankrupts the entire kingdom, and the crown can't afford to pay the peasant soldiers who fought on its behalf. This economic disaster leads to some peasants turning to banditry in order to survive, while others rise up in revolt against the aristocracy. But rebels and cutthroats are just the start of Ivalice's problems. Because while the nobility is trying to fight off angry commoners, word gets out that the king of Ivalice is dying, and nobody has been named regent for his young son. This kicks off a messy civil war where everyone, from peasant to prince, attempts to change the political landscape to their advantage. This results in a dizzying array of shifting alliances, broken promises, shady deals, and tons of backstabbing. Even the church gets tangled up in the war. In the middle of all of this is a young hero, Ramza, who doesn't really fit in anywhere due to his half-common, half-noble blood. Ramza is a sweet, honorable, and painfully naive protagonist who is continuously swept up in other people's battles. Battles between commoners, battles between nobles, battles between commoners and nobles, and even battles involving a third invisible faction that may be responsible for a lot of the world's problems. As Ramza, the player has to constantly navigate a complex political drama where there is little to no moral clarity. Even when the back half of the story slips more and more into fantasy and becomes more about good versus evil, there are still some pretty shocking moments that jolt the player back into the grim realities of war. It's a gripping, harrowing tale that's elevated by beautifully dramatic music, which is digitally enhanced here, and fantastic voice acting that really helps drive home the desperation, despair, and determination felt by almost everyone in Ivalice. Having said that, I should note that as much as I love the voice acting and how wonderfully expressive the character sprites are, I'm not crazy about the visuals. There's no doubt the Ivalice Chronicles has a higher resolution than its predecessors, and it's kind of pretty, but at the same time, the graphics look kind of blurry, almost like the camera is slightly out of focus. Now apparently this is due to the sprites being upscaled rather than redrawn, but you guys tell me. And I mean, it wasn't too distracting, but it was hard not to notice during long cutscenes. I should also note that as rich and complex as the story is, it does sometimes creak under its own weight. There are a lot of people and places to keep track of, and I often had to go back and review who was who and why they were relevant to the story. Happily, that task was made easier by the new and improved user interface, which makes tabbing across different menus and looking up pertinent information like character stats, in-game lore, and what items are in your inventory pretty easy. In short, the story is one of the main reasons you want to experience or re-experience this seminal work. But it's not the only reason. So let's talk about the progression system and overall gameplay, which can be very addicting. And we're going to start with the job system, which is where a lot of the fun lies. So in Final Fantasy Tactics, there are 20 vocations split between two main categories, melee fighters and magic users. As Ramza reluctantly shuffles from battlefield to battlefield, attempting to save the people of Ivalice from themselves, he'll have the opportunity to hire dozens of fighting units, plus a few guest stars who will join him on his journey. Although I should clarify, you can usually only field between 4 and 6 units at a time. These starting units can be assigned one of two jobs. Squire, a sword-wielding class that can throw rocks, which is way more useful than it sounds, and Chemist, a type of medic whose main job is to lob healing items at people. How do you know which job to assign a unit? Well, each unit comes with 2 attributes, bravery and faith. If a unit has higher bravery than faith, make them a melee fighter. If they have higher faith than bravery, you might want to think about making that unit a magic user. And that's the quick and dirty explanation. Once these units start gaining experience on the battlefield, 2 things will happen. They'll accumulate job points that can be used to unlock cool job-specific skills, and their job level and base stats will go up. If a character levels up their job enough, they'll unlock more advanced vocations, which gives them access to even cooler and more useful abilities. The idea is to unlock as many vocations as you can, master them, and then start mixing and matching all kinds of crazy abilities to create the ultimate warrior. How do you mix and match your abilities? Well, this is where the character customization really shines. If you look at the unit screen, you'll notice it's divided in 2. The left side lets you equip all sorts of cool stat-boosting weapons and armor, and the right side lets you equip 4 different types of abilities: action abilities, reaction abilities, support abilities, and movement abilities. This means you can mix and match skills from up to 4 different vocations at once, and you can come up with some pretty effective combinations, like a dual-fisting monk that slugs down potions automatically and uses the ninja's double-wield ability to punch enemies repeatedly in the face, or a cold-blooded calculator who draws on the power of math and their previous experience as a black mage to instantly wipe out, well, everyone if you're not careful. No, I'm not gonna lie, accessing and mastering all these job classes involves quite a bit of level grinding, and I mean hours and hours of it. But in the end, it's worth it, because once you have the right combination of abilities, you can do some really cool stuff on the battlefield, and it's great. With that said, there is an insane difficulty spike that rears its ugly head starting in Chapter 3, and although I'm aware some of these battles are meant to be a skill check for the player, they can still be very frustrating. But luckily, there is a solution to even the toughest battles, and it usually involves having the right combination of skills. But being job savvy isn't the only thing that determines your success on the battlefield. There's also the Zodiac system, which checks the compatibility between 2 units and then uses a modifier to determine the effectiveness of a unit's actions. Now, I know the Zodiac system is a little confusing. I was also initially confused by it, so I think the best way to explain it is to very quickly explain how Western astrology works, and this is a very basic explanation, by the way. So as you guys know, there are 12 zodiac signs in Western culture: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. These 12 signs, which can either be positive or negative in polarity, are divided into 4 elemental categories: earth, water, air, and fire, as well as 3 modalities: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Now, luckily for us, Final Fantasy Tactics mostly focuses on the elemental aspect of each zodiac sign. But why? In Western astrology, a zodiac sign's corresponding element determines how compatible people are, and the general rule of thumb is that people who are of the same elemental type will automatically get along. So for example, I'm a Leo, which means I'm a fire sign, and I should get along well with other fire signs like Sagittarius and Aries. And if you look at a circular zodiac chart, you'll notice that together we fire signs make up a compatible triangle. Conversely, there is at least one zodiac sign from each of the other 3 elements that I don't get along with. In my case, Taurus, an earth sign, Scorpio, a water sign, and unless a person is male because opposites attract, Aquarius, an air sign who is opposite Leo in the zodiac chart and thus is traditionally the least compatible. Together we 4 make an unhappy square. As for the rest, apparently I'm fairly indifferent to these signs. No, I belabor the point because back in the day, the good people at Squaresoft decided to take the idea of zodiac compatibility and graft it onto the game. So if units have good compatibility with Ramza, the chances of him landing a healing spell, doing more damage to enemies, etc. goes up by 25%. And if they have bad compatibility, the chances of a spell landing a healing spell and doing more damage to enemies goes down 25%. Best and worst compatibility goes up or down by 50%. How do you know who's compatible? Well, every single unit comes with a color-coded Zodiac sign above their portrait. And if you can't remember which signs are compatible, you can look them up in the menu system. Now, I admit keeping track of Zodiac signs can get a little tedious, and honestly, although it can make a difference in tough fights, if you really want to, you can straight up ignore the Zodiac system altogether and focus on a unit's bravery and faith attributes instead. But I think it's worth tinkering with just because it adds an extra layer of strategy to the game. Now, once Ramza has trained the most compatible, vocationally diverse allies he can find, they'll finally be ready to take on the big baddies of Ivalice. Battles take place anywhere and everywhere: grasslands, deserts, haunted forests, etc., all of which are divided up into square grids. Players will need to decide each unit's actions based on how far they can move on the grid, what abilities they have, the types of enemy on the field, the time and weather, and what kind of terrain they're dealing with, which can benefit a unit or put a unit at a serious disadvantage. There's a lot of interesting possibilities on the battlefield, and I love that the decision-making process is made easier by the improved user interface that not only lets you clearly see every unit's Zodiac sign, their stats, and even what they're up to, but lets you see the turn order of each unit and how certain actions may affect that order. With that said, I don't quite understand why the game lets you see how long it'll take for your Black Mage to pop off a spell, but not how long it takes your Dragoon to complete a jump. I'm also disappointed that objects like ruins and rocks still block your view whenever you're trying to position an area of effect spell. Yes, there's a separate camera you can switch to for a bird's eye view of the battlefield, but it's kind of a clunky way of doing things. And like I mentioned before, there are a small handful of fights that feel a little unfair, especially when you're told to place 5 units on the field, and it turns out the first half of the fight is just Ramza desperately trying to survive the wrath of an astrological abomination, or a very angry human who blames Ramza for the state of the world because reasons. But these quibbles are those tiny little asterisks that I was talking about, and they're easy to overlook when there's just so much content to enjoy. In short, Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles is a great experience. The dramatic story, the deep and engaging customization, the excellent soundtrack and voice acting, it's all here and it's all good. So if you haven't played it yet, please take the time to do so. You won't regret it. Thanks so much for watching, guys. See you later.